The military transport helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Thunder, with a grinding roar of rotors against desert sand. Through the swirling dust cloud, a figure emerged carrying a worn duffel bag and a small wooden box clutched tightly against her chest. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez stepped onto the tarmac, her boots hitting American soil for the first time in 18 months. The box contained 11 military medals, 10 of which she had earned in the mountains of Afghanistan. The 11th, a Bronze Star with V for Valor, had belonged to her father. But this homecoming would be unlike any other. In 6 hours, she would stand before a panel of generals in a closed-door hearing that would determine whether those 10 hard-earned medals would remain hers or be stripped away forever. The charges against her were serious: insubordination, violation of direct orders, and conduct unbecoming of a non-commissioned officer. What the panel didn't know yet was why she had done what she did, or what she had discovered in those Afghan mountains that changed everything. The wooden box had been her father's final gift, passed down through a chain of custody that began with his death in Somalia 23 years earlier. Inside, wrapped in faded tissue paper, lay not just his Bronze Star but a letter she had never been allowed to read until her 18th birthday. The letter contained 3 sentences that would shape the rest of her life. The medal is not the inheritance. The courage to do what's right when everyone tells you you're wrong is the inheritance. Sometimes the greatest honor comes from the most impossible choice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Rodriguez family garage apartment in East Los Angeles had been Maria's world for most of her childhood. Her mother, Elena, worked double shifts at the local hospital while Maria attended Lincoln High School, where she excelled in ROTC despite having no intention of following her father's military path. The apartment was small, cramped, and filled with the constant hum of the city, but it was theirs. The only reminder of Staff Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez was a single photograph on the kitchen table and that wooden box, locked away in her mother's bedroom closet. Elena Rodriguez had made it clear from the beginning that Maria's father was a hero who died serving his country, but she refused to discuss the details. "Some stories are too heavy for children to carry," she would say whenever Maria asked questions. "When you're old enough to understand the weight of choices, you'll understand his." Maria's 18th birthday arrived on a sweltering July morning in 2019. Elena had been battling cancer for 6 months, and the treatments were losing their effectiveness. As Maria prepared to leave for basic training at Fort Benning, her mother finally retrieved the wooden box from its hiding place. Her hands shook as she turned the small brass key. "Your father wanted you to have this when you became a soldier," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to promise me something first. Promise me you'll remember that medals are just metal and ribbon. The real inheritance is here." She tapped her chest over her heart. "The courage he passed down to you through his blood, not his decorations." Inside the box, beneath the Bronze Star, Maria found a photograph she had never seen before. It showed her father in desert camouflage, standing with his unit in Somalia. But it was the letter underneath that changed everything. Written in her father's careful handwriting, it detailed the events that led to his death and the impossible choice he had made. Staff Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez had been ordered to abandon a wounded Somali child during an extraction operation. The mission parameters were clear: no civilians, no exceptions, no delays. But when he saw the 8-year-old girl trapped beneath debris from a mortar attack, he made a different choice. He stayed behind to free her, allowing his unit to extract safely while enemy forces closed in. He saved the child's life and died defending her until rescue arrived 3 hours later. The official report listed his death as, quote, "killed in action while defending his position." The Bronze Star citation read, "for heroic achievement in ground combat against a hostile force." What it didn't mention was that he had directly disobeyed orders to make it happen. What it didn't mention was that the 8-year-old girl he saved, Amara Hassan, had grown up to become a doctor who now worked with refugee children across East Africa. Maria read the letter 17 times that night. Her father's final words echoed in her mind: "The medal is not the inheritance." The courage to do what's right when everyone tells you you're wrong is the inheritance. Sometimes the greatest honor comes from the most impossible choice. 3 weeks later, she shipped out to Fort Benning for infantry training, Elena Rodriguez died while Maria was in her 6th week of basic training. She was granted emergency leave for the funeral, returning to the same church where her father's memorial service had been held 2 decades earlier. This time, she wore the uniform he never saw her earn. The transition from civilian to soldier came naturally to Maria Rodriguez, though she never spoke about why. Her drill sergeants noted her exceptional marksmanship, her natural leadership abilities, and her tendency to volunteer for the most challenging assignments. She completed infantry training in the top 5% of her class and requested immediate deployment to an active combat zone. Her first assignment came with the 1st Infantry Division, deployed to Afghanistan's Kunar province in early 2020. The region was known for its brutal terrain, complex tribal dynamics, and persistent Taliban presence. For most soldiers, it represented everything difficult about the war. For Maria, it represented an opportunity to understand what her father had meant about impossible choices. She served as a team leader for a squad responsible for village security and intelligence gathering. The work required building relationships with local Afghan forces, navigating cultural differences, and making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death for both American and Afghan personnel. Maria approached each mission with methodical precision, earning the respect of her fellow soldiers and the trust of the Afghan interpreters who worked alongside them. Her first medal came 3 months into the deployment. During a routine patrol near the village of Garam Chashma, her squad encountered an improvised explosive device that wounded 2 Afghan National Army soldiers and trapped them in an overturned vehicle. While her team established a security perimeter, Maria crawled through 50 meters of potential minefield to reach the wounded men. She provided medical aid under sporadic enemy fire and coordinated their evacuation, saving both lives. The Army Commendation Medal with V device arrived 6 weeks later. Her second medal came during a night raid on a suspected weapons cache. Intelligence had indicated that Taliban forces were using a compound near the village of Shtal to store mortars and ammunition. As her squad approached the target building, they discovered that the compound was also housing a dozen Afghan civilians, including several children. The mission commander ordered them to proceed with the raid despite the civilian presence. Maria requested permission to negotiate with the compound's occupants first, allowing the civilians to evacuate safely before the search began. Her initiative prevented civilian casualties and led to the successful seizure of a significant weapons cache. The Bronze Star Medal arrived 2 months later. The pattern continued throughout her deployment. Each medal represented a moment when Maria had found a way to complete her mission while protecting innocent life, even when doing so required creative interpretation of her orders. Her commanders praised her tactical innovation and cultural sensitivity. Her fellow soldiers began referring to her as, quote, Rodriguez the Guardian, for her ability to finish dangerous missions without unnecessary casualties. What they didn't realize was that Maria was following a different set of orders entirely. Each night before sleep, she would read her father's letter by flashlight. Each morning before dawn patrol, she would hold his bronze star and remember his words about impossible choices. She was not just serving her country. She was honoring an inheritance that had nothing to do with military decorations and everything to do with moral courage. The third medal came during an operation to establish a forward observation post in the mountains near the Pakistan border. Maria's squad was assigned to provide security, while engineers constructed defensive positions on a strategically important ridgeline. On the second day of construction, they received intelligence that a group of Taliban fighters was using a nearby cave system to launch mortar attacks on coalition convoys. The mission parameters were straightforward: locate and neutralize the enemy position using minimum necessary force. But when Maria's team reached the caves, they discovered that the Taliban fighters had been using local villagers as human shields, forcing them to carry ammunition and supplies. The tactical manual provided clear guidance for such situations, but Maria saw an opportunity that the manual hadn't anticipated. Instead of calling in air support or launching a direct assault, Maria spent 3 days observing the enemy's patterns and identifying moments when the civilians were separated from their captors. Working with her Afghan interpreter, she developed a plan to create a diversion that would allow the villagers to escape while simultaneously isolating the Taliban fighters. The operation required precise timing and significant personal risk, but it succeeded completely. 12 civilians escaped unharmed, and the enemy position was neutralized without a single non-combatant casualty. The Silver Star Medal arrived 4 months later, along with a commendation letter that described her actions as exemplifying the highest traditions of American military service. What the letter didn't mention was that Maria's plan had required her to expose herself to enemy fire for nearly 6 hours while coordinating the civilian evacuation. What it didn't mention was that she had turned down multiple opportunities to call for artillery support that would have ended the engagement quickly, but potentially killed innocent people. By the end of her first deployment, Maria Rodriguez had earned 6 medals for valor and exceptional service. She had also earned something more valuable: a reputation among both American and Afghan forces as a soldier who could be trusted to find solutions that honored both mission objectives and human dignity. Her squad had completed every assigned mission without losing a single team member or causing unnecessary civilian casualties. But it was during her second deployment, 18 months later, that Maria would face the impossible choice her father had written about. It was during those months in the mountains of Helmand Province that she would earn 4 more medals and lose everything she thought she understood about military service. And it was there, in a small village called Sangar that had never appeared on any official map, that she would discover what her father's letter really meant about the difference between honor and obedience. Maria's second deployment to Afghanistan began differently from her first. Instead of the relative stability of Kunar Province, she found herself assigned to Forward Operating Base Warrior in Helmand Province, where Taliban activity had intensified throughout the summer of 2021. The withdrawal timeline had been announced, and enemy forces were becoming increasingly bold in their attempts to reclaim territory they viewed as rightfully theirs. Her new assignment came with a promotion to Staff Sergeant and command of her own squad within Alpha Company, 2nd Battalion. The 12 soldiers under her command were a mix of combat veterans and soldiers on their first deployment. Among them was Private First Class David Chen, a former college student from Seattle who had enlisted after 9/11's 20th anniversary, reminded him why military service mattered. There was Specialist Jennifer Walsh from rural Montana, whose grandfather had served in Vietnam and whose steady nerves made her an exceptional medic. Corporal Marcus Thompson from Detroit had grown up in neighborhoods where gunfire was commonplace, but the mountains of Afghanistan presented challenges no urban environment could have prepared him for. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What set Maria apart from other squad leaders was her approach to mission planning. While her peers focused primarily on tactical objectives and force protection, Maria spent hours studying the cultural and political dynamics of each area of operations. She learned the names of village elders, understood local tribal relationships, and could identify which civilians might be sympathetic to coalition forces versus those who simply wanted to be left alone. This attention to detail proved crucial during her squad's first major operation in Helmand Province. Intelligence had identified a high-value target operating from a compound in the village of Safar, approximately 15 kilometers southwest of their base. The target, known by the codename Hammerhead, was believed to be coordinating attacks against coalition convoys and had been linked to several improvised explosive device incidents that had killed both American and Afghan forces. The operation briefing took place in a sweltering tent at 0400 hours on a Tuesday morning in August. Major Patricia Williams, the battalion's operations officer, laid out the mission parameters with military precision. Hammerhead has been positively identified through signals intelligence operating from Grid Square 41 RQN 7832. Your mission is to conduct a raid on the compound, capture or eliminate the target, and extract any intelligence materials present. Maria studied the aerial photographs of the target area while Major Williams continued the briefing. The compound consisted of 3 buildings arranged around a central courtyard, with high walls and limited access points. Standard operating procedure would involve a pre-dawn assault using breaching charges and overwhelming force. But something about the photographs troubled Maria, though she couldn't immediately identify what. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Major Williams addressed her directly. Your squad will provide security for the compound perimeter, while Bravo Squad conducts the actual assault. Estimated civilian presence is minimal based on surveillance, but you're authorized to use necessary force to maintain security. Maria nodded, but requested permission to study the intelligence reports more thoroughly. What she discovered in those reports would change everything. Buried in the technical surveillance data was information that hadn't been emphasized during the briefing. The compound wasn't just Hammerhead's operational base, it was also home to his extended family, including his elderly parents and several young children. More troubling was the timing of the planned assault. Intelligence indicated that Hammerhead would be present at the compound during a family gathering celebrating his nephew's engagement. The celebration would bring together relatives from across the region, meaning the civilian population at the target location would be significantly higher than the briefing had suggested. Maria spent the remainder of the night reviewing everything she could find about Hammerhead and his family. What emerged was a more complex picture than the intelligence summary had provided. While Hammerhead was undoubtedly responsible for attacks against coalition forces, he was also a respected member of his community who had provided protection for local villagers against other Taliban factions. His compound served not just as a military planning center but as a place where disputes were resolved and community decisions were made. The moral complexity of the situation reminded Maria of her father's letter. This was exactly the kind of impossible choice he had written about. A military objective that could be accomplished according to standard procedures, but at a cost that went beyond acceptable casualties, to include the destruction of an entire extended family and the destabilization of a community that depended on their protection. As dawn approached, Maria made a decision that would ultimately lead to the charges she now faced. She requested a meeting with Major Williams to propose an alternative approach to the mission. Instead of a pre-dawn assault, she suggested conducting surveillance to identify when Hammerhead might be isolated from his family members, allowing for a targeted operation that would achieve the military objective while minimizing civilian casualties. Major Williams was not receptive to the proposal. "Staff Sergeant, your job is to execute the mission as briefed, not to redesign it based on concerns about enemy family members. Hammerhead's relatives chose to associate with a terrorist. Any casualties are the result of his decisions, not ours." But Maria persisted, citing intelligence that suggested Hammerhead maintained a separate safe house where he conducted his most sensitive operational planning. If they could identify this location, they might be able to capture him away from his family compound entirely. She had developed relationships with local informants who might be willing to provide information about his movement patterns in exchange for assurances that the raid would not target civilians. The conversation grew heated. Major Williams accused Maria of allowing sympathy for the enemy to compromise her judgment. Maria responded that protecting civilian life was not sympathy for the enemy, but adherence to the rules of engagement and the moral principles that distinguished American forces from their adversaries. "You have your orders, Staff Sergeant," Major Williams concluded. "The operation proceeds as planned. If you have reservations about your ability to execute those orders, I can find another squad leader who doesn't." Maria left the meeting knowing she faced an impossible choice. She could execute the mission as ordered, likely resulting in multiple civilian casualties and the destruction of a family that included elderly grandparents and young children. Or she could find a way to modify the mission parameters without directly violating her orders, risking her career but potentially saving innocent lives. That afternoon, while conducting what was officially described as, quote, pre-mission reconnaissance, Maria and her interpreter made contact with a local elder who had previously provided information about Taliban activities in the region. Through careful questioning, she learned that Hammerhead did indeed maintain a separate facility where he met with other Taliban commanders to plan operations. More importantly, he would be visiting that location the following evening to coordinate with fighters arriving from Pakistan. Maria now had actionable intelligence that could allow her to capture Hammerhead without conducting the assault on his family compound. But using this information would require her to delay the original mission and potentially allow the target to escape if her alternative plan failed. It would also require her to make decisions that went beyond her authority as a squad leader. She spent the night weighing her options. Her father's Bronze Star lay in her personal kit, along with the letter that had guided every major decision of her military career. The words seemed especially relevant now. Sometimes the greatest honor comes from the most impossible choice. The next morning, Maria presented herself to Major Williams with a request that she knew would be denied. She asked permission to delay the compound assault by 24 hours to pursue the intelligence about Hammerhead's alternate location. As expected, Major Williams refused, emphasizing that the mission would proceed as originally planned. What Major Williams didn't know was that Maria had already set an alternative plan in motion. Working with her most trusted squad members and using her network of local contacts, She had developed an approach that would allow her to capture Hammerhead at his planning meeting, while officially maintaining her position for the compound assault. It would require precise timing, exceptional coordination, and a willingness to accept full responsibility if anything went wrong. The plan she devised was elegant in its simplicity but dangerous in its execution. While officially participating in the compound assault, Maria would split her squad to simultaneously conduct surveillance on Hammerhead's alternate location. If the intelligence proved accurate and Hammerhead appeared at the planning meeting, a small team would move to capture him while the main assault force discovered an empty compound. But the plan required her to make decisions without authorization, deploy resources beyond her designated area of operations, and potentially place her soldiers at risk for a mission that existed only in her imagination. If successful, she would have captured a high-value target while protecting civilian lives. If unsuccessful, she would have compromised an official military operation and exposed her squad to unnecessary danger. As the sun set over Helmand Province, Maria Rodriguez prepared to make the choice that would define the rest of her military career. In 12 hours, she would either validate her father's belief that sometimes the greatest honor comes from the most impossible choice, or she would discover that some principles are too expensive to maintain in the reality of modern warfare. The wooden box containing her father's bronze star sat on her cot as she conducted final preparations. Tomorrow would determine whether she was worthy of the inheritance he had left her, or whether that inheritance was simply too heavy for one person to carry. Either way, she would face the consequences of her decision with the same courage that had brought her father home as a hero 23 years earlier. The mission that would earn Maria Rodriguez her 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th medals was about to begin, but it was also the mission that would lead to charges that could strip away everything she had accomplished in service to her country. Sometimes, she was beginning to understand. Honor and obedience point in opposite directions, and soldiers must choose which path to follow. The operation began at 0300 hours under a moonless sky that provided perfect concealment for military movement. Maria's squad took their designated positions around the Hammerhead compound, while Bravo squad prepared for the main assault. But unknown to Major Williams or the other commanders monitoring the operation from Forward Operating Base Warrior, Maria had already deployed half her team to a secondary location 3 kilometers away. Corporal Thompson and Private Chen had moved into position near the suspected planning site 2 hours earlier, equipped with night vision equipment and long-range communication gear. Their mission was to confirm whether Hammerhead would appear at his alternate meeting location as Maria's intelligence suggested. If he did, they would provide overwatch, while Maria attempted something that had never been tried in their area of operations, a simultaneous dual operation that would capture the target while protecting his family. Specialist Walsh remained with Maria at the compound perimeter, along with the rest of the squad's newest members who didn't yet know about the unauthorized surveillance mission. Maria had made the difficult decision to compartmentalize the operation, protecting soldiers who might face questioning later while ensuring she had trusted personnel in position to execute the alternative plan. At 0315 hours, Thompson's voice crackled through Maria's encrypted radio headset. Guardian 6, this is Overwatch 2. Target confirmed at secondary location. Count 4 military-age males, 1 matching primary target description. They appear to be reviewing maps and documentation. Maria felt her heart rate increase. Her intelligence had been accurate. Hammerhead was indeed at his planning meeting, exactly as her local contact had predicted. Now she faced the moment of truth. She could report this information to Major Williams and request permission to modify the mission, or she could proceed with her unauthorized plan and accept full responsibility for the consequences. Through her night vision scope, Maria could see Bravo Squad moving into final assault positions around the compound walls. In 15 minutes, they would breach the main entrance and sweep through the buildings where Hammerhead's family was sleeping. Standard procedures called for flex cuffs, interrogation of all military-age males, and detention of anyone who couldn't immediately prove their non-combatant status. Guardian 6, this is Command. Major Williams' voice came through the command frequency. Bravo is in position. You are cleared to provide perimeter security for compound assault. Time to target, 12 minutes. Maria keyed her radio carefully. Command, Guardian 6. Perimeter secure. Standing by. What she didn't report was that Thompson and Chen were simultaneously moving into position for an entirely different operation. At the secondary location, Hammerhead and his associates had spread detailed maps across a wooden table illuminated by battery-powered lanterns. Thompson, observing through high-powered optics, could see weapons caches marked with red ink and Coalition patrol routes highlighted in yellow. The intelligence value of the documents was potentially enormous, but capturing them would require precise coordination between his Overwatch position and Maria's approach. Guardian 6 Overwatch 2, Thompson whispered into his radio, target appears to be conducting operational planning with 3 associates. Documents visible include area maps with tactical markings. Request permission to move to capture position. Maria checked her watch. 10 minutes until the compound assault began. She had to make her choice now. Overwatch 2, Guardian 6. You are cleared to move. Maintain radio contact and await my signal. What happened next would be analyzed by military investigators for months. Maria left her assigned position at the compound perimeter and began moving toward the secondary location, taking Specialist Walsh with her, but leaving the rest of her squad to maintain security as ordered. Her plan was to reach Hammerhead's meeting before the compound assault began, capture him and his associates along with their planning materials, and then return to her assigned position before anyone realized she had left. The movement across 3 kilometers of hostile territory took 45 minutes. Maria and Walsh moved carefully through terrain they had studied but never traversed at night, using dry riverbeds and rocky outcroppings to avoid detection. Behind them, they could hear the distant sound of the compound assault beginning as Bravo Squad breached the walls and began their search. When they reached Thompson and Chen's position, Maria could see the meeting still in progress. Hammerhead and his 3 associates were absorbed in their planning discussion, unaware that they were being observed by American forces. The building they occupied was isolated, with no civilians visible in the surrounding area. Guardian 6, this is command. Major Williams' voice cut through the radio static with obvious irritation. Where is your position report? Bravo has secured the compound, but the primary target was not present. I need immediate confirmation of perimeter security status. Maria realized she was at the point of no return. In the next few minutes, her unauthorized operation would either succeed brilliantly or fail catastrophically. Either way, she would have to explain why she had abandoned her assigned position to pursue a mission that existed only in her imagination. Command, Guardian 6, she responded carefully. Investigating possible target movement to secondary location. We'll report findings immediately. The silence that followed told Maria everything she needed to know about Major Williams' reaction to this information. But before the inevitable explosion of questions could begin, Maria signaled Thompson and Chen to begin the capture operation. What followed was a textbook demonstration of small unit tactics executed under impossible circumstances. Thompson provided overwatch from an elevated position while Chen moved to cut off potential escape routes. Maria and Walsh approached the building from opposite directions, using hand signals to coordinate their movements. The capture itself took less than 3 minutes. Maria entered through the main entrance while Walsh secured the rear exit. Hammerhead and his associates, surprised by the sudden appearance of American soldiers in a location they had considered completely secure, offered no resistance. Within minutes, Maria had zip-tied all 4 men and secured the documents they had been studying. But the real significance of the operation became clear only when Maria examined those documents. What she discovered would earn her the 10th medal but also provide the evidence that would later be used to justify the charges against her. The documents revealed that Hammerhead's network was far more extensive than intelligence had indicated. The maps showed weapons caches, safe houses, and operational plans that extended across 3 provinces. More importantly, they revealed that several high-ranking Afghan National Army officers were providing information to Taliban commanders, compromising coalition operations, and putting American lives at risk. Among the captured materials was a communication log showing that details of the original compound assault had been leaked to Hammerhead's network hours before the operation began. The assault had been expected, which explained why the primary target had not been present at his family compound. Maria's unauthorized intelligence gathering had not only protected civilian lives, but had also prevented a failed mission that would have accomplished nothing except alienating the local population and exposing coalition tactics. Command, Guardian 6, Maria reported as she secured the captured materials, primary target and 3 associates in custody. Significant intelligence materials recovered. Requesting immediate extraction and intelligence analysis support. Quote, "A radio silence that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes. When Major Williams finally responded, her voice carried a tone Maria had never heard before, a mixture of amazement, fury, and grudging respect. Guardian 6, Command. Explain your current position and how you came to be in possession of the primary target." Maria took a deep breath and began the explanation that would define the rest of her military career. Command. Acting on locally developed intelligence regarding target movement patterns, I conducted surveillance of a secondary location while maintaining perimeter security of the primary target compound. Target was positively identified at the secondary location and captured along with operationally significant intelligence materials. What she didn't say was that she had violated direct orders, left her assigned position without authorization, and conducted a mission that had never been approved by higher command. What she didn't say was that her actions, while successful, represented the kind of initiative that could either be rewarded with commendation or punished with court-martial depending on the political needs of her commanders. The extraction helicopter arrived 90 minutes later, carrying not only the captured personnel and materials, but also Colonel James Harrison, the battalion commander who would ultimately decide Maria's fate. As they flew back to Forward Operating Base Warrior, Maria studied the intelligence documents more carefully and realized that her unauthorized operation had accomplished something beyond her original intentions. The communications intercepts among the captured materials revealed that Hammerhead's network had been planning a coordinated attack on coalition convoys scheduled for the following week. The attack would have involved improvised explosive devices placed along 3 separate routes, potentially killing dozens of American and Afghan forces. By capturing the planning materials, Maria had not only prevented civilian casualties at the family compound, but had also disrupted an operation that would have cost many military lives. But as the helicopter touched down at the base, Maria also realized that her success would not necessarily protect her from the consequences of her methods. Military justice focused as much on adherence to command structure and proper procedures as it did on operational outcomes. She had achieved remarkable results through unauthorized means, which created a dilemma for commanders who needed to maintain discipline while recognizing exceptional performance. Colonel Harrison's first words as they disembarked set the tone for everything that would follow. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, report to my office immediately after debriefing. Bring the captured materials and prepare to explain every decision you made during this operation." Maria saluted and acknowledged the order, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether her father's inheritance of moral courage would be validated, or whether it would cost her everything she had worked to achieve in military service. The 10 medals she had earned through 18 months of combat operations suddenly seemed less important than the single Bronze Star her father had left her and the letter that had guided her to this moment of ultimate testing. As she watched the captured Taliban operatives being escorted to detention facilities, Maria Rodriguez prepared to face the most difficult interrogation of her career, explaining to her own commanders why sometimes the greatest honor comes from the most impossible choice. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Warrior had witnessed countless after-action reports, but nothing quite like what unfolded over the next 6 hours. Colonel Harrison sat across from Maria at a metal table scarred by years of use, flanked by Major Williams and Captain Sarah Mitchell from the Judge Advocate General's office. The captured intelligence materials lay spread between them like evidence in a trial that hadn't yet been formally convened. What none of them knew as the session began was that Maria's unauthorized operation had triggered a chain reaction that extended far beyond their small corner of Afghanistan. In Washington, D.C., intelligence analysts were already reviewing the documents Maria had captured, and what they found would change everything about how her actions were perceived by the highest levels of military command. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Colonel Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of 25 years in uniform. "I need you to walk me through every decision you made during this operation, starting with your initial request to modify the mission parameters." Maria straightened in her chair, knowing that her career hinged on the next few hours. She began with her discovery of the intelligence gaps in the original briefing, her research into Hammerhead's family connections, and her growing concern about civilian casualties. She explained her attempts to work within proper channels by proposing alternative approaches to Major Williams. "When those proposals were rejected," Maria continued, "I faced a choice between executing a mission that would likely result in significant civilian casualties or finding a way to achieve the military objective through different means." Captain Mitchell interrupted with a question that cut to the heart of the legal issues. Staff Sergeant, are you saying you believed your orders were unlawful? Maria had anticipated this question and knew her answer would be crucial. No, ma'am. The orders were lawful under the rules of engagement, but I believed there was an opportunity to achieve better results through modified execution. Modified execution? Major Williams interjected sharply. You mean unauthorized deviation from explicit orders? You abandoned your assigned position, deployed personnel outside your area of operations, and conducted a mission that existed only in your imagination. Before Maria could respond, Colonel Harrison held up his hand for silence. His phone had begun buzzing with an incoming call marked Priority CENTCOM. He answered immediately, his expression growing increasingly serious as he listened to the caller. Yes, sir. She's here now. We're conducting the initial debriefing. A long pause. I understand, sir. We'll maintain security protocols until your arrival. Another pause. 6 hours? Yes, sir. We'll be ready. Colonel Harrison ended the call and studied Maria with new interest. Staff Sergeant, it appears your operation has attracted attention from Central Command. General Patricia Vale will be arriving this evening to personally review the intelligence you captured. Until then, this debriefing is suspended and all materials are to be secured under top-secret protocols. The room fell silent. General Vale's reputation preceded her throughout the military. As the Deputy Commander of U.S. Central Command, she rarely left her headquarters in Tampa, unless something of extraordinary significance required her personal attention. Her impending arrival suggested that Maria's captured documents contained information far more valuable than anyone had initially realized. Over the next several hours, while Maria waited in temporary quarters under what amounted to protective custody, intelligence analysts at multiple levels began piecing together the full scope of what she had uncovered. The communication logs she had captured revealed not just tactical planning by Hammerhead Cell, but evidence of a sophisticated network that had been operating undetected for over 2 years. The breakthrough came when analysts compared the captured documents with previously unexplained coalition casualties across 3 provinces. Pattern analysis revealed that specific operations had been compromised by leaked intelligence, resulting in ambushes that had killed 17 American soldiers and 32 Afghan National Army personnel over the past 18 months. More shocking was the discovery that the intelligence leaks were being coordinated through a network that included not only Afghan National Army officers, but also a civilian contractor, working directly with coalition forces. The contractor, an American citizen named Robert Kellerman, had been using his access to operational planning to provide Taliban forces with detailed information about patrol routes, convoy schedules, and planned operations. General Vale's C-130 transport touched down at Forward Operating Base Warrior precisely 6 hours after Colonel Harrison's phone call. She traveled with a small team that included a counterintelligence specialist, a criminal investigator, and a senior judge advocate officer. Their arrival marked the beginning of what would become one of the most significant counter-espionage investigations of the entire Afghanistan conflict. The evening briefing took place in the base's secure communications facility, a hardened bunker designed to handle classified materials up to the highest levels. General Vale, a compact woman in her 50s whose Silver Star from Iraq had made her a legend among combat officers, listened without interruption as Maria recounted the events leading to Hammerhead's capture. When Maria finished her account, General Vale opened a classified folder and spread its contents across the table. The documents included communications intercepts, financial records, and surveillance photographs that painted a picture of betrayal at the highest levels of coalition operations. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, General Vale began, what you captured 3 days ago has exposed a network responsible for the deaths of dozens of coalition personnel. Robert Kellerman has been selling operational intelligence to enemy forces for over 2 years, and the Afghan officers in Hammerhead's network were his primary contacts. Maria felt the weight of this revelation settling over her. Her unauthorized operation had stumbled into something far more significant than she had imagined. But General Vale wasn't finished. The communications you captured included detailed plans for what Taliban leadership was calling Operation Red Sand, a coordinated series of attacks designed to coincide with the final phases of coalition withdrawal. The attacks would have targeted evacuation convoys, airlift operations, and Afghan personnel who had assisted coalition forces. Conservative estimates suggest that Operation Red Sand would have resulted in hundreds of casualties and completely destabilized the withdrawal process. The room remained silent as the implications sank in. Maria's decision to pursue unauthorized intelligence gathering had not only prevented civilian casualties at a family compound, but had also uncovered a conspiracy that threatened the lives of thousands of military personnel and Afghan allies. But General Vale's most surprising revelation was yet to come. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, are you familiar with your father's complete service record?" Maria looked up sharply, confused by the apparent change of subject. "Yes, ma'am. Staff Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, killed in Somalia in 1993. He received the Bronze Star for his actions during his final mission." General Vale opened another folder, this one marked with historical classification stamps. "Your father's record was classified at a level above what you were previously authorized to review. What you weren't told was that his actions in Somalia uncovered a similar intelligence leak that was compromising United Nations operations. His decision to stay behind and protect that child also allowed him to secure documents that exposed a weapons trafficking network operating through humanitarian organizations." Maria felt the world shift around her. Everything she thought she knew about her father's final mission was incomplete. He hadn't simply made a moral choice to protect a child. He had made a strategic decision that served larger operational objectives, while maintaining his ethical principles. "Your father's Bronze Star citation was deliberately written to conceal the intelligence value of his actions," General Vale continued. "The full scope of his contribution remained classified to protect ongoing operations and the safety of assets in the field. But his intelligence gathering prevented weapons shipments that would have prolonged the conflict and cost many more lives." The parallels between father and daughter were unmistakable. Both had faced impossible choices between following orders and pursuing opportunities to serve broader strategic objectives. Both had chosen to accept personal risk in order to protect innocent life, while accomplishing military goals that their commanders couldn't officially authorize. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," General Vale said formally, "based on the intelligence value of your operation and its contribution to coalition security, I am recommending you for the Distinguished Service Cross. Your actions demonstrated exceptional initiative and resulted in the prevention of significant casualties among both military personnel and civilian populations." Maria sat stunned. The Distinguished Service Cross was the Army's second highest decoration, awarded only for extraordinary heroism in combat operations. But even as she processed this recognition, she realized that General Vale wasn't finished. "However," the general continued, "military discipline requires that we address the procedural violations involved in your operation. While the results justify the risks you took, the methods you used cannot be officially endorsed without undermining command authority and operational security protocols." Captain Mitchell spoke for the first time since the briefing began. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you are hereby notified that formal charges will be filed regarding your deviation from assigned orders and unauthorized deployment of personnel. These charges will be reviewed in conjunction with the recommendation for commendation, creating what legal precedent refers to as, quote, competing jurisdictional claims." Maria understood immediately what this meant. She would simultaneously face charges that could end her career and receive recognition that could define her as one of the most effective soldiers of her generation. The military justice system would have to decide which aspect of her actions carried greater weight, the rule-breaking or the results achieved. General Vale closed the classified folders and looked directly at Maria. "Staff Sergeant, you've placed us in an unprecedented situation. Your father's legacy appears to include not just courage but also an ability to see opportunities that others miss. The question now is whether the Army is prepared to recognize that some of our most valuable soldiers are those who understand when traditional procedures serve the mission and when they don't." As the briefing concluded, Maria realized that her story was far from over. In the coming months, she would face a legal process that would examine every aspect of her decision-making, while simultaneously preparing to receive recognition that would elevate her among the most decorated soldiers of her generation. The wooden box containing her father's Bronze Star waited in her quarters, along with the letter that had guided her to this moment. But now she understood that her inheritance was more complex than she had realized. She had not only inherited her father's courage, but also his burden. The responsibility of making impossible choices in service of principles that sometimes conflict with procedures. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as the investigation into the intelligence leak expanded and the legal review of her actions began. But tonight, for the first time since arriving in Afghanistan, Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez understood exactly why her father had written that sometimes the greatest honor comes from the most impossible choice. Her father's medal was her only inheritance until she earned 10 more in combat. Part 5. The Aftermath and New Understanding. The military transport that carried Maria back to the United States 3 weeks later also carried Robert Kellerman in federal custody. The civilian contractor who had sold coalition intelligence to Taliban forces sat in restraints just 20 feet from the soldier, whose unauthorized operation had exposed his betrayal. Neither spoke during the 18-hour flight, but the irony was not lost on Maria that her decision to violate orders had led to the capture of someone whose following of procedural access had cost American lives. The homecoming ceremony at Joint Base Lewis McChord took place on a crisp October morning under circumstances unlike any in recent military history. Maria stood at attention in her dress uniform while facing a panel that included General Vail, 2 federal prosecutors, and the Secretary of the Army himself. The ceremony would simultaneously recognize her extraordinary service and formally charge her with violations of military discipline. Secretary Harrison Wells, a former infantry officer who had served 3 tours in Iraq, opened the proceedings with words that captured the complexity of Maria's situation. Today we gather to honor a soldier whose actions exemplify both the highest traditions of military service and the challenging realities of modern warfare. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, your case has required us to examine fundamental questions about initiative, authority, and the moral obligations of leadership. The charges were read first, as protocol demanded: violation of direct orders, unauthorized deployment of personnel, conduct outside established command authority. Each specification carried potential penalties ranging from reduction in rank to court-martial and imprisonment. The legal language was precise and unforgiving, reflecting a military justice system designed to maintain discipline and chain of command. But then came the recognition. General Vail stepped forward carrying a blue folder embossed with the seal of the Department of the Army. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, by direction of the President of the United States, you are hereby awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in military operations against enemy forces. The citation, read aloud to the assembled audience of military personnel and families, detailed Maria's actions in language that transformed her unauthorized operation into exceptional initiative under enemy fire and decisive leadership that prevented significant coalition casualties. The medal itself, a bronze cross suspended from a ribbon of blue and red stripes, represented recognition given to fewer than 200 soldiers since the beginning of operations in Afghanistan. As General Vail pinned the medal to Maria's uniform, she spoke quietly enough that only Maria could hear. Your father would be proud, but he would also understand the burden you now carry. Excellence that violates procedure creates precedents that others will try to follow without understanding the judgment required. The legal proceedings that followed took place in a closed hearing room where the competing claims of military justice and operational necessity would be resolved. Maria's defense team, led by Colonel Michael Torres from the JAG Corps, had built their case around the doctrine of military necessity, the principle that soldiers could deviate from standard procedures when immediate circumstances required actions not covered by existing orders. The prosecution, represented by Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Nash, argued that allowing Maria's actions to go unpunished would undermine the entire structure of military discipline. If every soldier can decide for themselves when orders should be modified based on their personal assessment of the situation, we no longer have a military organization. We have an armed mob. The hearings stretched across 2 weeks, with testimony from military experts, combat veterans, and legal scholars. The central question was whether Maria's results justified her methods, and whether the Army could maintain discipline while recognizing exceptional initiative. Witnesses included Major Williams, who maintained that Maria's actions had been insubordinate regardless of their outcome, and Colonel Harrison, who testified that her intelligence gathering had saved dozens of American lives. The most compelling testimony came from an unexpected source. David Chen, the private first class who had been part of Maria's split team during the unauthorized operation, requested permission to address the panel. His words carried the weight of someone who had experienced the mission firsthand. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez didn't ask us to break any rules, Chen testified. She asked us to be better soldiers than the rules required. When we captured those documents and prevented Operation Red Sand, we weren't violating our oath to defend our country. We were fulfilling it in the most complete way possible. The legal resolution came in a form that satisfied neither critics nor supporters completely. Maria would face no criminal charges or court-martial, but would receive an official reprimand for failure to follow established command procedures. The reprimand would remain in her service record permanently, affecting future promotions and assignments. In return, she would retain her Distinguished Service Cross and continue serving with the notation that she had been counseled regarding the importance of working within command structure while maintaining operational initiative. But the true resolution of Maria's case would not come from legal proceedings. It came 3 days after the hearings concluded, when she received a call from General Vale requesting a private meeting at the Pentagon. The conversation that followed would define the remainder of her military career. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, General Vale began, as they sat in her Pentagon office overlooking the Potomac River. Your case has generated considerable discussion at the highest levels of military leadership. Some view you as an example of everything right about American soldiers. Others see you as a dangerous precedent that threatens good order and discipline. Maria listened carefully, understanding that her future was being decided in this conversation. General Vale continued, "What both sides agree on is that you possess judgment and initiative that cannot be taught in any military school. The question is whether we can find ways to channel those qualities within structures that maintain discipline while encouraging innovation." The proposal that General Vale outlined would transform Maria's military career completely. Instead of returning to conventional infantry operations, she would be assigned to a classified program that identified and developed soldiers capable of operating in gray area situations where standard procedures provided insufficient guidance. You would be working directly with Special Operations Forces, but not as a member of their units, General Vale explained. Your role would be to serve as a liaison between conventional forces and special operations, identifying opportunities for collaborative operations that conventional commanders might not recognize. The assignment would require Maria to attend advanced training in intelligence analysis, cultural studies, and unconventional warfare tactics. More importantly, it would place her in situations where her ability to see beyond standard procedures would be valued rather than questioned. She would be operating under authorities that specifically recognized her right to exercise judgment in situations not covered by traditional rules of engagement. Maria accepted the assignment immediately, understanding that it represented vindication of her father's legacy in ways she had never imagined possible. But General Vale had one final revelation that would complete Maria's understanding of her inheritance. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, your father's service record contains one detail that has remained classified until now. After his death in Somalia, the intelligence he gathered was used to establish the program you're about to join. The unit you'll be assigned to exists because your father proved that some of our most valuable soldiers are those who understand when rules serve the mission, and when the mission requires going beyond rules. As Maria left the Pentagon that afternoon, she carried with her not only the Distinguished Service Cross, but also a complete understanding of what her father had bequeathed to her. The courage to make impossible choices was indeed her inheritance, but so was the opportunity to serve in ways that honored both military discipline and moral principle. The wooden box that had contained her father's Bronze Star now held 11 medals, each representing a moment when Maria had chosen to serve something larger than herself. But the true measure of her inheritance was not in the decorations she had earned, but in the precedent she had established for soldiers who would face similar impossible choices in future conflicts. 3 months later, Maria Rodriguez reported to Fort Bragg for assignment to a unit that officially did not exist. Her new role would take her to places that appeared on no maps and involve her in operations that would never be publicly acknowledged. But for the first time since opening her father's letter on her 18th birthday, she understood exactly why some honors can only be earned through the most impossible choices. 2 years after Maria Rodriguez accepted assignment to the classified program at Fort Bragg, the ripple effects of her Afghanistan operation continued expanding through military and intelligence communities worldwide. What had begun as a single soldier's unauthorized decision to prevent civilian casualties had evolved into a new doctrine for addressing the complex moral and tactical challenges of modern warfare. The program Maria had joined, officially designated as the Adaptive Leadership Initiative, but known informally among participants as Gray Unit, had grown from a small experimental team to a multi-service organization with representatives from Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Special Operations Commands. The unit's mission was deceptively simple: identify situations where standard operating procedures failed to address emerging threats or opportunities, and develop innovative approaches that maintained military effectiveness while upholding American values. Maria's role within the Gray Unit had evolved significantly since her initial assignment. Now holding the rank of Sergeant First Class, she served as a senior instructor at the program's training facility, teaching other soldiers how to recognize and navigate situations where moral courage and tactical innovation intersected. Her students included officers and enlisted personnel selected for their demonstrated ability to think beyond conventional parameters while maintaining loyalty to mission and country. The training scenarios Maria developed drew directly from her Afghanistan experience, but adapted to address a wide range of contemporary challenges. Students faced simulations involving cyber warfare ethics, humanitarian intervention decisions, and counter-terrorism operations in urban environments where civilian populations could not be easily separated from hostile forces. Each scenario required participants to balance competing demands of military necessity, legal constraints, and moral principles. One particular training exercise had gained recognition throughout the special operations community as the Rodriguez scenario. It placed students in command of a unit conducting counterinsurgency operations in a fictional Middle Eastern country where enemy forces were using hospitals, schools, and religious sites as operational bases. Students had to develop approaches that would neutralize the threats while protecting civilian infrastructure and maintaining relationships with local populations. The scenario had no perfect solutions, which was precisely the point. Maria's experience had demonstrated that some of the most important military decisions occurred in spaces where regulations provided insufficient guidance, and commanders had to rely on judgment, training, and moral courage to find acceptable paths forward. Gray Unit's mission was to prepare soldiers for exactly those moments when the handbook ran out and leadership began. But Maria's influence extended beyond training programs. The intelligence network she had helped expose in Afghanistan had led to investigations that uncovered similar compromise patterns in Iraq, Syria, and several African nations where American forces were conducting advisory missions. The counterintelligence techniques developed from her captured documents had become standard protocols for identifying and preventing insider threats across all coalition operations. Robert Kellerman's prosecution had revealed the full scope of his betrayal and led to policy changes in how civilian contractors were vetted, monitored, and granted access to classified information. His 25-year federal prison sentence sent a clear message about the consequences of trading American lives for personal profit, but more importantly, the security procedures developed from his case had prevented similar penetrations of military operations. The broader impact of Maria's story became apparent during a NATO conference on adaptive military leadership held at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. Officers from 17 allied nations gathered to discuss how their militaries could encourage innovative thinking while maintaining discipline and operational security. Maria's case study had become required reading for the conference, representing a successful example of how individual initiative could serve strategic objectives when properly channeled. General Vail, now serving as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, opened the conference with remarks that directly referenced Maria's legacy. The nature of modern conflict requires us to develop leaders who can operate effectively in environments that our existing doctrines have not fully anticipated. The challenge is not whether to encourage adaptive thinking among our personnel, but how to do so in ways that strengthen rather than undermine military effectiveness. Among the conference attendees was Lieutenant Colonel David Chen, Maria's former private first class, who had participated in the unauthorized operation that captured Hammerhead. Chen's rapid promotion reflected not only his individual capabilities, but also the military's recognition that soldiers who had learned adaptive leadership under fire possessed valuable skills for addressing contemporary security challenges. Chen's presentation to the NATO conference detailed how Maria's approach to mission planning had influenced an entire generation of junior officers. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez taught us that following orders and thinking independently were not contradictory concepts, he explained. She showed us that the most effective soldiers are those who understand both the letter and the spirit of their mission, and can find creative ways to accomplish both simultaneously. Quote, the conference proceedings were classified, but key concepts from the discussions were incorporated into military education programs throughout NATO countries. Maria's emphasis on cultural understanding, local population protection, and creative problem-solving became standard elements of officer training curricula, from West Point to Sandhurst to the École Spéciale Militaire de Saint-Cyr. One of the most significant developments emerging from Maria's influence was the establishment of moral courage protocols within Special Operations Commands. These protocols provided explicit guidance for situations where soldiers identified opportunities to prevent civilian casualties or achieve strategic objectives through methods not covered by standard operating procedures. The protocols included clear channels for rapid consultation with higher command, legal review processes that could be completed within operational timeframes, and protection measures for personnel who identified valid alternatives to planned operations. The protocols had been tested in several real-world scenarios, with remarkable success. In Somalia, a special forces team used the procedures to modify a raid on suspected terrorist facilities when they discovered the buildings were being used as schools during daytime hours. The team coordinated with local authorities to conduct the operation during evening hours when civilian presence was minimal, achieving their objectives while maintaining community relationships essential for ongoing counterterrorism efforts. In the Philippines, Marine advisors applied similar principles when supporting local forces in operations against Abu Sayyaf militants. Instead of conducting direct assault operations that would have resulted in significant civilian casualties, the Marines helped Filipino forces develop infiltration and surveillance techniques that allowed them to identify and capture key terrorist leaders without endangering local populations. These successes validated the core principle that Maria had demonstrated in Afghanistan. Military effectiveness and moral principle were not competing values, but complementary approaches that, when properly integrated, could achieve better results than either could accomplish alone. The personal cost of Maria's choices became clear only in retrospect. The official reprimand in her service record had limited her promotion opportunities within conventional military structures, making her assignment to Gray Unit not just a recognition of her capabilities, but also the only path available for continuing her military career. Traditional infantry commands remained reluctant to accept officers whose records indicated past violations of command authority, regardless of the circumstances or outcomes involved. But Maria had found peace with these limitations through her work with Gray Unit and her deepening understanding of her father's legacy. The classified records she had been granted access to revealed that Staff Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez had faced similar career constraints after his Somalia operation. His decision to stay behind and protect the child while gathering crucial intelligence had earned him posthumous recognition, but had also marked him as someone who prioritized mission success over procedural compliance. The parallel between father and daughter extended beyond their military service to the broader impact of their choices. Carlos Rodriguez's intelligence gathering in Somalia had led to the disruption of weapons trafficking networks that were fueling conflicts across East Africa. The information he died protecting had ultimately contributed to peace agreements that ended years of civil war and saved thousands of civilian lives. Maria's captured documents from Afghanistan had similarly generated intelligence that extended far beyond their immediate tactical value. The communication networks she had exposed were connected to terrorist organizations operating in Pakistan, Iran, and several Central Asian republics. Disrupting these networks had prevented attacks on civilian targets throughout the region and compromised funding sources that supported extremist activities across multiple countries. The wooden box that had once held only her father's Bronze Star now contained not just Maria's 11 medals, but also letters from some of the people whose lives had been affected by her choices. Among them was a message from Dr. Amara Hassan, the Somali child Carlos Rodriguez had died protecting, who had learned of Maria's service through military historical research. Dr. Hassan's letter described how her life had been shaped by an American soldier's decision to prioritize her safety over his own, and how Maria's story represented a continuation of the same principled service. Another letter came from Afghan interpreter Rashid Ahmadi, who had worked with Maria's unit and whose family had been protected when she prevented the assault on Hammerhead's compound. Ahmadi had successfully relocated to the United States through the Special Immigrant Visa Program and was now working as a cultural advisor for military training programs. His children attended the same elementary school in Virginia, where Maria had established an after-school program for military families dealing with deployment stress. But perhaps the most significant letter came from Jennifer Walsh, Maria's former medic, who had left military service to attend medical school. Walsh's letter described how Maria's example had influenced her decision to specialize in emergency medicine and volunteer with humanitarian organizations providing medical care in conflict zones. "You taught me that serving others sometimes requires us to go beyond what's expected or authorized," Walsh wrote. I carry that lesson into every emergency room and every refugee camp where I work. The impact of Maria's story continued expanding through the soldiers she trained, the policies her experience had influenced, and the precedents her choices had established for future military operations. Gray Unit had grown into a permanent component of Special Operations Command structure, with training facilities at multiple bases and exchange programs with allied militaries seeking to develop similar capabilities. Maria's current assignment involved developing training partnerships with African military forces seeking to address extremist threats while protecting civilian populations. Her work took her to countries where American soldiers operated in advisory roles, helping local forces develop techniques for conducting effective military operations without alienating the communities they were meant to protect. On a humid evening in Senegal, while conducting training exercises with West African counterterrorism forces, Maria received word that she had been selected for promotion to Master Sergeant. The promotion reflected not just her individual achievements, but the military's recognition that adaptive leadership had become an essential capability for addressing contemporary security challenges. That night, as she had done countless times over the past decade, Maria opened the wooden box containing her medals and her father's letter. But this time, she also retrieved a new addition, a photograph of her father's grave at Arlington National Cemetery, where she had finally been able to visit him after learning the complete truth about his service. At the grave site, she had left a simple message written on military stationery. "Mission accomplished, Dad. The inheritance was worth more than you knew." Next to the message, she had placed a small American flag and a copy of the policy directive establishing moral courage protocols throughout Special Operations Commands. As Maria prepared for another day of training with soldiers who would face their own impossible choices in future conflicts, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small apartment in East Los Angeles to leadership positions in some of the military's most innovative programs. The path had been marked by personal cost, professional risk, and moments of profound moral testing. But it had also been marked by the knowledge that some inheritances transcend individual recognition or career advancement. The courage to do what's right when everyone tells you you're wrong had been passed from father to daughter. And through her work with Gray Unit, it was now being passed to a new generation of soldiers who would carry it into conflicts not yet imagined. The 11 medals in Maria's wooden box represented moments of individual heroism and tactical success. But the true measure of her inheritance lay in the policies, programs, and precedents that would guide American military service long after her own career had ended. Sometimes the greatest honor comes from the most impossible choice, and sometimes those choices echo through generations of soldiers who never knew the names of those who made the path possible. In the growing twilight of another day in military service, Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez closed the wooden box and prepared to teach another group of soldiers how to navigate the gray areas where honor and duty, courage and wisdom, tradition and innovation must somehow find common ground. The inheritance continued, passed forward through training and example to soldiers who would face their own moments of testing in a world that demanded both military effectiveness and moral courage. The story that had begun with a father's impossible choice in Somalia and continued through a daughter's unauthorized operation in Afghanistan was far from over. It lived on in every soldier who chose to see beyond standard procedures to find better ways of serving both mission and principle, and in every policy that recognized adaptive leadership as an essential component of military excellence. Maria Rodriguez had inherited more than a medal from her father. She had inherited a legacy of moral courage that would shape military service for generations to come, proving that sometimes the most valuable gifts are not the ones we receive, but the ones we pass forward to those who will carry them into an uncertain future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.